She wept beside the old grave before she knew. His daughter heard and said, "Come home with us." I did not mean to watch her. I had come to the southern ridge with Elia because my daughter had been asking for 3 weeks to see the place where the old boundary stones stood. The ones carved before my grandfather's grandfather had drawn the first formal line of Veldros territory on a proper map. Elia was 8 years old and had lately decided that history lived in stone, a conviction I had no desire to argue with, because it meant she spent her afternoons reading instead of climbing the east parapet in weather that turned my wolves gray with worry. We had come quietly without escort. Elia liked it that way. She said the boundary stones felt different when there were too many boots around them, that the stones went quiet, as though they were listening to make sure no one had come to move them. I understood the instinct. There are places in Veldros that feel like held conversations, and the southern ridge is one of them. I saw her before Elia did. She was kneeling at the small, unmarked grave that sat 20 yards east of the third boundary stone, the one the old records called the healer's marker, though no one in the keep had ever been able to tell me with certainty whose grave it was, or why a healer had been buried at a boundary line rather than in the village ground. The marker was barely a stone at all anymore. A century of rain had taken most of whatever had been carved into it, and what remained was a low, rounded shape half buried in the autumn grass, easy to miss if you did not know to look. She knew to look. She had found it precisely. She was kneeling in the damp grass with her hands folded in her lap, not touching the stone, only looking at it, and she was crying. Quietly, the way a person cries when they are not asking anyone to notice. Her shoulders moved once, and then she was still again, and the only evidence of the tears was the way she lifted one hand and pressed it briefly to her mouth, as if to hold something in. I put my hand on Elia's shoulder to stop her moving forward. Elia looked up at me with the expression she had inherited from her mother, the one that asked, without words, whether I had taken leave of my senses, and then looked back at the woman, and then looked at me again. "She's sad," Elia said, in what she believed to be a whisper. "I know." "Who is she?" "I don't know." "Then we should ask." I said Elia. But Elia had already slipped out from under my hand. She was 8 years old, and the gap between my intentions and her actions was, in my experience, approximately 4 seconds on a good day and none at all on a day like this one, which was apparently not a good one. I watched my daughter cross the 20 yards of autumn grass, in her small brown cloak with the hood already slipped back, because she never kept the hood up no matter how many times I reminded her, and stop a careful 2 feet from the kneeling woman. "Are you all right?" Elia said. The woman startled, not a sharp flinch, but the slow, careful reorientation of someone who had been somewhere else entirely and was now returning. She turned her head. She looked at Elia with eyes that were still wet, and something in her face settled, not into a performance of composure, but into a genuine quiet, as though the sight of a small, serious child asking a direct question had rearranged the whole shape of the moment. "Yes," she said, "thank you for asking. I'm all right." "You were crying," Elia said, with the frank precision of a child who saw no reason to pretend otherwise. "I was," the woman agreed. "It's an old sadness. Old sadnesses are easier than new ones, I find. They have softer edges." Elia considered this with the gravity she brought to most statements of significance. "My papa says grief is just love that doesn't know where to go yet." The woman looked at Elia for a moment without speaking. Then she looked past Elia to where I stood, and our eyes met for the first time. She had a quiet face, not a guarded face. I had seen enough guarded faces to know the difference. Guarded faces hold their stillness through effort. Hers was simply still, the way a deep pool is still, not because nothing moves in it, but because what moves in it moves slowly and with direction. She had dark hair, loose from travel, and she was wearing the practical wool coat of someone who moves between settlements on foot or light horse, and has learned to dress for weather rather than appearances. The coat was good quality but worn at the elbows. Her hands, when she finally pushed herself to her feet, were the hands of someone who worked, stained faintly at the fingertips in a way I recognized as seed handling, the particular dark that comes from sorting and pressing and sorting again. She gave me a small, composed nod. Not a pack bow, she was unaffiliated then, or at least not from Veldros. Alpha King, she said, calm. Not nervous. You know this grave, I said. It was not a question. She answered it as though it were. My grandmother's grandmother is buried here, she said. Her name was Kala. She was a healer who worked this territory for 11 years, about a century ago. She never had formal affiliation with any pack, but the records she kept, the ones I carry, suggest she considered this place home. She reached into the worn leather satchel at her hip and drew out a small bundle, a journal wrapped in oilcloth, the kind of wrapping meant to last decades. The oilcloth had been replaced more than once. The journal itself was old enough that the edges of the pages had gone the color of autumn leaves. I came to mark where she was, the woman said. I didn't know if the grave would still be here. I'm glad it is. Elia had been listening to all of this with the focused attention she reserved for things she found genuinely important. Now she said, "What's your name?" Nara, the woman said. I'm Elia. A pause. Come home with us. I said, Elia. Elia looked at me with perfect patience. Papa, her grandmother is buried here, and she walked a long way to find the grave, and now it's going to rain. I looked at the sky. Elia was, as she frequently was in practical matters, entirely correct. She is also, Elia added, in the tone of someone presenting evidence in a formal proceeding, a seed merchant. You've been saying for 3 weeks that we need someone who knows about the northern varietals for the spring planting records. This was also true. Nara looked between us with an expression I would come to recognize as one of her characteristic ones. A kind of warm, restrained amusement, the amusement of someone who finds the world genuinely interesting and does not feel the need to perform that interest or suppress it. I am a seed merchant, she said, though I'm not sure that earns me an invitation. The grave does, Elia said, with great certainty. You can't come all this way to find your grandmother and then sleep in the wet. We brought her in. I had intended it to be one night. The rain came in earnest before we reached the keep gate, and by the time we arrived, Elia was soaked through despite every effort, and Nara had produced, from somewhere in the depths of her satchel, a second oilcloth wrapping that she draped over Elia's shoulders with the quick, practiced competence of someone who had done this many times for small people in wet weather. Elia had accepted this without comment, which was itself notable. My daughter had strong opinions about being managed, and she had accepted the oilcloth with the ease of a person receiving something that simply made sense. I housed her in the south guest chamber, the one that looked out over the old garden. When I came to speak with her after the evening meal, she had the old journal open on the writing table and a set of newer papers beside it, and she was cross-referencing something in her own handwriting with something in the journal's cramped century-old script. She did not look up immediately when I entered. This would have struck many people in my court as an oversight requiring correction. I found that I did not mind it. She was working, and the work was clearly precise, and there was something in the way she handled the old journal, with both care and total unsentimental attention, the way a craftsperson handles a tool they respect, that I found I wanted to watch for a moment before I interrupted it. She was thorough, Nara said without looking up, my ancestress. She kept records of everything, soil composition in the fields she worked, which plants flourished in which growing conditions, the drainage patterns in the lower settlement. None of it was asked of her. She did it because she found it useful to know. That quality appears to run in the family, I said. She did look up then. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but the edge of one, the place just before a smile decides whether to go further. I've been a seed merchant for 14 years, she said. You develop the habit of paying attention to conditions. The wrong seed in the wrong soil is a year of failure. The right one is a harvest that carries a family through winter. Where do you travel from? Mostly from the eastern growing settlements along the Fen corridor, but I range widely when the records call for it. There are varieties being grown in the northern territories now that have never been formally cataloged. I've been building a record of them for the past 4 years. On your own account? On my own account, she agreed. No one commissioned it, I simply thought someone should. I sat down across from her at the writing table, which was not something I did often, seat myself as an equal in conversation, at a work table in the evening. And I was aware, distantly, that I was doing it without having decided to. What does the journal say about the grave? I asked. Her expression changed again, this time more fully, into something quieter and more personal, the expression of someone handling a subject that matters to them. Very little directly, she said. Calla was not a woman who wrote about herself. She wrote about the work and the people she treated and the territory she moved through. But there's an entry, the last one, written in a different ink, which suggests it was added later, possibly by someone else who had access to the journal, that says only, "She is remembered in the Southfield stone. She earned her place here. I don't know who wrote it." She was quiet for a moment. "I think it was someone who loved her," she said. "That's the only kind of person who would think to add that." My wolf had been still from the moment we walked through the keep gate with her. Not still the way my wolf went still in threat. That stillness was a different thing entirely, a coiling readiness. This was another kind of stillness, the kind that comes when something has been moving for a very long time and finally, without warning, arrives at the place it has been moving toward. I had felt that stillness before. Once. Years ago, in a way that had led to Elia, and to 8 years of something I would not trade for any power or territory on this earth, and also to a grief that had eventually, as Nara's ancestress's grave had apparently done, grown softer edges. I recognized the stillness. I was not certain, that first evening, what to do with it. The morning brought Elia. Nara was already in the old garden when Elia found her, or found her again, since Elia apparently considered finding someone once sufficient grounds for a continuing acquaintance. Elia had come down before the morning meal, in her second-best cloak because her best was still damp, and discovered Nara crouched at the edge of the garden's southern bed with her hands in the soil, moving with the focused economy of someone taking stock. I learned all of this from Dorset, my keep second, who had a gift for observation, and an equally strong gift for knowing when to relay what he had observed without being asked. "Your daughter is explaining the garden's history to her," Dorset said, "in some detail. The seed merchant appears to be listening." "She always listens to Elia," I said, which was true. I had noticed it the previous evening, the quality of attention Nara brought to my daughter's conversation. A full and genuine attention rather than the patient tolerance that adults frequently deployed toward children who spoke at length. "She's also been in the soil for 40 minutes, Dorset said. "She found something near the old west wall." I went down to the garden. Nara had found, in the south bed near the west wall, a section of root growth that she was examining with the sort of careful urgency a healer brings to a wound. She had a small notebook open beside her, and she was sketching something with rapid light strokes. "This is a northern varietal," she said without turning around. "Grayborough root. It grows in permafrost margins. It shouldn't be this far south." She paused. "Unless someone planted it deliberately, perhaps 100 years ago, knowing it could be persuaded to establish in sheltered conditions." She did turn around then, and she was looking at me with an expression I had not seen from her yet. Bright, direct, fully activated, the look of someone who has found the thing they came to find without knowing they were looking for it. "Your keep's old garden records," she said. Do you have them? In the East Archive. May I look at them? Now. She glanced at the soil on her hands, and then at the open notebook, and then at the root system she had been examining and said, "After breakfast." Elia, who had been crouching nearby following all of this with great attention, said, "She's staying for breakfast, Papa." "I can see that," I said. The garden records were in better condition than either of us expected, which was a relief, and they told a story that Nara read with the growing quiet of someone confirming something they had half known. Kala the healer had planted the Greybarrow root. The record was in her hand, the same cramped, precise script as the journal, and it was dated exactly 103 years ago. The entry was brief: Greybarrow root from the North Circuit established in the south bed near the wall. Sheltered. We'll see whether it holds through winter. It should. The soil remembers cold. She was right, Nara said. It held. It's been growing there for a century. She was quiet for a moment, her hands resting on the open record book. She didn't sign most of these, Nara said. She just kept the records. The soil, the planting, the drainage notes, years of it. None of it formally asked for, none of it credited to her. She simply thought someone should, so she did. "And now you are doing the same," I said. She looked up. "Someone should," she said simply. My wolf had been still for 2 days now. Still in the way that my oldest wolf, the gray one, Arden, who had been with me for 12 years and who had learned in that time to distinguish between silence that needed filling and silence that needed respecting, had also gone still. Arden had taken up a position near the door of the East Archive that morning, which was not his habit. He was not a dog. He did not station himself at doorways, but he was stationed at this one. Nara noticed him at some point in the late morning. She looked at him for a moment, and then she reached out her hand, not toward him, simply open beside her at the table edge, and Arden crossed the room and put his nose against her fingers. I had not seen Arden do that with anyone but Elia in 4 years. One night became 3. I did not pretend, by the end of the second day, that it was merely the rain keeping her. The rain had stopped by mid-morning of the second day, and the roads south were clear, and Nara made no mention of leaving, and I made no mention of asking her to, and Elia made very certain that no such conversation could find any purchase by filling every available silence with things she wished to show Nara. The old maps in the upper library, the new loom in the weaving room, the 3 pups that had been born to the pack's youngest wolf in the autumn, and were currently being housed in the outer ward because they were too small and too stupid, in Elia's considered assessment, to be trusted among the older wolves yet. Nara had held all 3 pups with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to small things that needed holding. She had checked their eyes and their coats with gentle efficiency, and then she had looked at Elia and said, "They're healthy. They're going to be very large." "I know," Elia said, with the satisfied air of someone confirming a prediction. "I'm going to need a bigger coat." Nara had laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, brighter than I had expected it to be, and I understood, watching it happen, that I had already been, without realizing it, constructing a careful inventory of her expressions. The careful near smile, the focused quiet of the work, the contained grief at the grave, the bright certainty when she had found the Greybarrow root. And now this, a full, real laugh that had no self-consciousness in it at all, prompted by an 8-year-old's absolute confidence that 3 wolf pups were primarily a question of wardrobe management. That evening, after Elia was in bed, I sat with Nara in the south room where the hearth burned well and said, with the directness I had found, in the course of 8 years of territory management, to be the most useful approach to most things, "What are your plans?" She considered the question with the same serious attention she brought to everything. "The spring circuit runs through the eastern settlements and then north," she said. "I've been commissioned to catalog the new northern varietals for 3 settlements that want to expand their growing range. It will take the better part of the season." The work you said no one commissioned. That work I do on my own account. The spring circuit is a proper commission. A pause. Why? I have a position, I said, that has been vacant for 2 years. Our territory's seed and planting records have been maintained adequately but not well. The person who maintained them before, a man named Carwick, was thorough in his way, but he did not understand what he was recording. He recorded the what but not the why. Your ancestress understood the why. The Graybarrow root is still growing, because she understood why a sheltered south bed near a stone wall holds heat differently from an open north bed. Nara was quiet. I'm not asking you to give up your circuit, I said. The circuit work is its own value, and your cataloging of the northern varietals is useful not just to 3 settlements, but to anyone managing territory that extends into the frost margins. I'm asking whether Veldros might be a place you return to. A base, she said. If you want that word. She looked at the fire for a moment. You're offering this because of the records, she said. It was not quite a question. It was the question of a careful, honest person making certain they understood the terms. Partly, I said. She looked at me. My wolf had been still for 3 days. Partly, I said again. She did not say anything immediately. She looked at me with the particular stillness that I had come to understand was not evasion but consideration. The same quality of attention she brought to the old records and the root system and Elia's conversation. Full, honest, moving slowly and with direction. I've been traveling for 14 years, she said at last. I haven't had a base since I was 22. I know. I wouldn't know how to have one. You've been in one place for 3 days, I said. You've organized the archive, established a growing inventory of the South Garden, identified a root system that the keep had overlooked for 30 years, and told my daughter 4 stories about seed varieties that she has since repeated to me in detail at breakfast. You seem to manage a base adequately. The near smile arrived. That's a very practical argument, she said. I'm a very practical man. She was quiet again. Then, my ancestress kept records for 11 years, she said. She never asked for credit. She did it because she thought someone should. I know. I'd like to keep her records properly, Nara said. All of them, including the ones she kept here. I'd like them to be attributed to her. I'd like there to be a marker on that grave that can actually be read. That can be arranged, I said. She looked at the fire for a long moment. Then I'll think about coming back, she said. It was not a yes. I accepted it as what it was, the answer of a careful person who did not say things they did not mean and who meant this one. She left on the 4th morning. Elia walked with her to the south gate, which she did not normally do with departing guests, and I watched from the wall, not hiding, simply not intruding on whatever my daughter had to say. Elia said it. Nara listened. There was a moment where Elia took hold of the edge of Nara's coat and looked up at her with the expression I recognized from the boundary stones, the one that asked whether you had taken leave of your senses, and then said something that made Nara crouch down to Elia's level and look at her with complete seriousness. I did not hear what either of them said. Nara stood. She looked up at the wall where I stood, and there was something in her face I had not seen from her yet, not the careful near smile, not the focused work quiet, not the bright certainty or the contained grief. Something steadier than all of those. Something that knew something. She raised her hand once. I raised mine. She walked south. She came back in 41 days. I knew because Arden knew. Arden had been sleeping near the south gate for a week, which Dorset reported to me with the studiously neutral expression of a man who had served the territory for 20 years and had learned which observations to present without commentary. He's been there since the 28th day, Dorset said. I know, I said. The gate wolves have taken to keeping him company. I know. Your daughter has been leaving him food there every morning, and telling him she knows it's difficult. I said, Dorset. Yes, Alpha King. You may go. He went with a composure that I respected. Arden was at the gate when Nara came through it. He rose from where he had been lying and crossed to her with a steadiness that was different from the quick enthusiasm of young wolves greeting a favorite person. It was the steady crossing of a creature that had known something and waited for it, and was now simply confirming what it had known. He put his head under her hand. She looked down at him and then up at me, where I was standing at the inner ward entrance, and her expression was the steady one again, the one that knew. 41 days, she said. I wasn't counting, I said. Arden was, she said. I could tell by the quality of his patience. Behind me, Elia said, I told you she'd come back. I had not heard Elia come down the stairs. This happened frequently. You're early, I said. I was watching from the parapet, Elia said. You know I've asked you not to. Papa, Elia said, with the patience of someone who had heard this before and found it sincere but not particularly persuasive. She had already moved around me and was standing 3 feet from Nara, looking up at her with the direct attention she reserved for things she had already decided about. Did you catalog the northern varietals? Elia asked. I have 3 new entries, Nara said, including one that's never been formally recorded. I think it grew from an old trade route that was abandoned about 60 years ago. The seeds must have traveled with the caravans and established in the frost margins. Will you show me? Yes, Nara said, if I may stay. Elia looked at me. I said she may stay. Staying became more than staying. It did not happen quickly, and I would not have had it happen quickly. Nara was not a woman who accepted things she had not considered thoroughly, and I was not a man who offered things carelessly, and what grew between us grew the way the Grayborough root had grown in the sheltered south bed. Slowly, with intention, in conditions that were not the obvious ones but turned out to be exactly right. She took the record's position formally, with a commission drawn up by Dorset in the precise language of territorial agreements, which Nara read line by line and amended in 3 places before she signed it, and which I was grateful for because all 3 amendments were correct, and I should have thought of them myself. She kept the spring circuit and the autumn one. She was on the road for parts of every season, and she sent records back when she was, and Elia wrote her letters with the cheerful thoroughness of a child who had decided that letters were a form of conversation and saw no reason to be brief about them. Nara wrote back, every one. The letters Elia did not share with me. She had privacy, my daughter, and I respected it. But I could tell by the quality of Elia's dinner-table conversation which days the letters arrived. On those days she was more animated, more full of specific observations about the world, as though the letters had refreshed her curiosity the way rain refreshes a garden. My wolf was never still again in the old way. The old stillness had been waiting, a long patience that had had nowhere to go. This was different. This was the settled quality of something that had arrived and knew it. I did not rush it. I was aware of not rushing it. I was also aware by the 3rd month that not rushing it and not saying anything were becoming 2 different things, and that I was confusing them. It was Arden who settled it. Arden, who was 12 years old and had the prerogatives of 12 years of service, who slept at Nara's chamber door when she was in the keep, and at the south gate when she was not, and who had taken to walking beside her in the old garden in the mornings with the air of a creature who had made a decision and saw no reason to revisit it. I was watching them from the inner courtyard one morning, Nara with her notebook, Arden at her side, the autumn light on both of them, and something in the picture was so simply right, so settled in itself, that I understood I had been making this complicated because I was afraid of it, and not because it was actually complicated. I went down to the garden. Nara looked up when she heard me. She had the notebook open. She had been recording something about the Greybarrow route. I could see the sketch of the route system on the open page. "It's wintering well," she said. "Better than I expected. The south wall holds more heat than even Kala's record suggested." "She was right about the soil," I said. "She was right about most things." A pause. "I've been thinking about that. About what it means to be right about something and never be formally credited for it. About whether it matters." "Does it?" She was quiet for a moment, her pen resting on the open page. "I think it matters to the people who come after," she said. "Not for the credit itself, but because it tells them where they come from, what they're made of." She looked at the Greybarrow route. "I'm made of someone who planted this because she thought someone should. I like knowing that." "I'd like Elia to know what she's made of," I said. Nara looked at me. "Elia knows what she's made of," I said. "She knows her mother's name and her mother's courage and the way her mother laughed because I've told her. But I'd like her to know more than that. I'd like her to know what it is to grow up with someone who plants things carefully and waits to see whether they hold." The stillness in my wolf had become something so settled. It had almost stopped feeling like a wolf's instinct and started feeling like a plain fact. Like a name carved in old stone that reads clearly when the light is right. "Nara," I said. She looked at me with the steady expression, the one that knew. "I'm not asking you to give up the circuit," I said. "I know you won't. I know the work matters to you and the work is right and the work is part of who you are. I'm asking whether Veldros might be home, whether I might be someone you return to." The near smile arrived, but this time it went further than it had gone before. It resolved, fully and without reservation, into something real. "You've been home since the 41st day," she said. "I thought you knew." I said, "Nara." She said, "Calder." I took her hand. It was covered in ink from the morning's notes and faintly in soil from the garden, and it was the most honest hand I had ever held. "Then stay," I said. "Not because you must. Because it's where the work is, and the root is wintering well, and Elia has 17 more things she wants to show you, and Arden has apparently decided the question for both of us." Arden, at her feet, did not look up. He had the settled composure of a creature whose opinion had been obvious for months, and who found it faintly unnecessary that the rest of us had taken this long. Nara laughed, the full, real, unguarded laugh, the one I had been collecting without knowing I was collecting it. "All right," she said, "I'll stay." We named her Luna in the winter, before the inner council, with Dorset and 6 of the senior wolves present, and Arden lying across Nara's feet, with the entire settled patience of a creature, who had simply been waiting for the rest of us to confirm what he had known from the south gate on the 41st day. Elia stood beside her. This had not been planned. Elia had simply appeared in the formal chamber at the appointed time, in her best cloak with the hood actually up, wearing an expression of composed dignity that I recognized as her attempting to look as old as she felt the occasion warranted. She had taken up her position at Nara's left side without asking permission and without looking at me for approval, which was characteristically Elia, and Nara had looked down at her with an expression I had not seen on her face before, not the near smile, not the full laugh, not the working quiet or the graveside grief. Something new. Something that was none of those things and all of them. The expression of someone who had been carrying something a very long way and had finally, without ceremony or announcement, been able to put it down. She put her free hand on Elia's shoulder. Elia put her hand over Nara's. I named her my Luna in the language the territory required, and then in the plain words that I preferred, and then I said, because it was true and I saw no reason not to say true things in plain language. My daughter asked her to come home with us, at a boundary stone in the autumn rain, because she was weeping beside a grave and Elia did not see any good reason why someone should weep alone. That was the beginning. Everything that followed was simply the territory's way of confirming what Elia already knew. Elia, to her credit, did not look smug. She looked satisfied, which is different, and which I found in that moment to be one of the most purely fine things I had ever seen. Nara looked at me. It is the particular quality of her looking that I have never been able to describe adequately, not even in the years since, not even now when I know it so well I could reconstruct it from memory, the way she reconstructs a root system from a set of old records. The fullness of it, the honesty of it, the way it carries everything she has considered and nothing she has not. She looked at me, and the bond that had been settling into its place for months settled the last small distance into something that simply was, the way a name carved in old stone finally reads clear when the light comes right. My ancestress planted something here 100 years ago, Nara said, and left no formal record of herself. I came to find the grave and I found everything else. She looked at Elia. Thank you for asking me to come home. You were sad, Elia said simply, and you had soft edges. The counsel was perfectly correct in its dignity. Dorset maintained an expression of absolute professional composure. The 6 senior wolves were respectfully attentive. Arden did not move from Nara's feet for the entire ceremony, and at the end of it he raised his head and looked at me with the patient gray eyes of a wolf who had made his position clear in October and found nothing since then to revise. He had been right. He was frequently right. I had learned, over 12 years, not to take longer than necessary to agree with him. She keeps the circuit. Spring and autumn, she is on the road, and the road is better for it, because Nara's catalogs are read now in 12 territories, and the northern varietal records she has been building on her own account have been formally adopted by the Fen Compact as the standard reference, which happened without her asking for it, because the work was correct and thorough, and someone on the Compact's Records Council had been reading it for 2 years before they told her. She came home from the autumn circuit with new ink on her hands and 3 new entries in the northern catalog, and a small carved stone marker in her satchel. A mason's work, clean and clear, commissioned in the South Town and carried 200 miles back to Veldros. She said it herself, at the boundary stone on the southern ridge. I was there. Elia was there, in her best cloak with the hood up because it was November and cold, which I noted and did not mention. Arden was there because Arden went where Nara went when she was in Veldros, and he had made peace with the South Gate wolves, and they had made peace with him, and none of us saw any reason to revisit the arrangement. The stone read in clean carved letters, Calla Healer, she worked this territory and planted what would last. The soil remembers. Nara set it into the ground with her own hands, tamping the earth firm around the base with the careful competence she brought to every task that mattered. Then she sat back on her heels and looked at it for a moment. She didn't know, Nara said. When she planted the Grayborough root, she didn't know it would still be growing 100 years later. She just thought it might if the conditions were right. She was right, I said. She usually was. Nara stood. She brushed the soil from her hands, and she looked at me with the steady expression, the one that knows, and then she looked at Elia, who was reading the carved letters with the serious attention she brought to inscriptions of significance. The soil remembers, Elia said, reading it aloud. It does, Nara said. Elia nodded with the gravity of a child, confirming a fact she has personally verified. Then she took Nara's hand on one side and my hand on the other, and she began to walk back toward the keep, and I walked with them, my daughter and my Luna, and the old wolf moving through the autumn grass at the southern boundary of the territory I have kept, and the light came low and clear across the ridge, and the carved letters on the new stone caught it for a moment and held it. Clear as a name that has always been there, waiting for the right angle of light to read it.